The ink wrote on paper and disappeared. The next night, it appeared on her skin. Memory is not a recording. This is one of the first things cognitive science established about the human mind, and one of the things most people find most unsettling. Memory is reconstructive, fallible, subject to revision and loss and the slow contamination of time. We do not replay the past. We rebuild it imperfectly every time we reach for it. Most of us find this disconcerting in the abstract and don't think about it much in practice. The past feels stable. Our sense of ourselves as continuous, as the same person who was there at all those earlier moments, remains intact. Not because the memories are perfect, but because the gaps are not yet large enough to feel like gaps. The ink that Miriam Vogel acquired from a 17th century estate sale was called Memoria Aeterna, eternal memory. It was labeled in the hand of someone who either believed this description was accurate or wanted very badly for it to be. The ink kept everything. For exactly 24 hours, it kept it on the page. After that, it kept it on the writer. Miriam wrote 6 letters in the first week. By the 3rd week, the gaps in her mind had begun. By the 6th, she could not remember the name of the street she had grown up on. The bottle was still half full. Miriam Vogel had been a bookbinder for 23 years, specializing in the restoration of historical texts and the creation of archival quality bindings for institutions and private collectors who needed their holdings maintained at a standard that outlasted commercial expectations. Her workshop was in a converted Victorian terrace in Bristol, the ground floor given over entirely to the work. Long tables, a smell of hide glue and linen thread, and the specific compound smell of old paper and new leather that she had loved since her apprenticeship, and that she could no longer imagine the absence of. The estate sale in Bath had been a professional visit, a private collector's library coming to auction, predominantly 18th century, with several items that interested her for restoration work. The ink was not in the catalog. She found it on a side table of miscellaneous sundries, priced at £8, a small glass bottle with a hand-lettered label in brown ink. Memoria Aeterna, ink for the permanent record. Use on clean white pages only. Below this, in a different hand, smaller. Do not write what you cannot carry. The second notation interested her enough to buy the bottle. She brought it back to the workshop and set it on the shelf with her other archival inks, and looked at it for a week before she used it. She used it first on a letter. Not a professional document, but a personal one. A letter to her sister that she had been composing in her mind for several months, and had repeatedly failed to finish on ordinary paper, the sentences dissolving before she got them right. She mixed the Memoria Aeterna with distilled water to thin it to a workable consistency, filled a dip pen, and wrote. The ink was extraordinary. Not visually, it was a standard deep black, drying to the specific matte quality of a good iron gall ink. But the writing had a quality she could only describe as accurate. Every sentence she produced was exactly what she meant. No approximation, no fall short between the thought and the expression. The words fitting the content with a precision she had never experienced in her own writing. She finished the letter in 40 minutes and felt, when she read it back, that she had produced the truest document of her own thinking she had ever made. She sealed it and set it on the desk for the morning post. she found the letter in the morning. The envelope was intact, sealed, addressed. She opened it to check the contents before posting. The pages were blank. Clean white paper, no trace of writing, no shadow of impression from the pen. As though the letter had never been written. She held the pages under the lamp. She ran her fingers across the surface. Nothing. She looked at her forearm. The letter was there. Every word in the specific quality of the ink's matte black on the inside of her left forearm from wrist to elbow. Not tattooed, not surface applied, but in the skin with the quality of an inscription that had always been there and had simply been invisible until now. She could read every sentence. The handwriting was her own. The content was a letter she had written, in full, exactly as she had written it. She spent the morning trying to rub it off and failed, and then spent the afternoon looking at it with the specific attention of a bookbinder who has worked with inks for 23 years and has never seen one do this. It was not surface ink. It was in the dermal layer. Not a tattoo, which is injected, but a quality of coloration that suggested the ink had migrated through the paper and through the desk and through whatever else was between the paper and her arm with the specific patient insistence of something that knows where it is supposed to be. She looked at the bottle. Memoria Aeterna. She looked at the second notation. Do not write what you cannot carry. She wrote 3 more letters that week. Each one appeared on her skin the following night. Different locations, the second on her right calf, the third across her right shoulder blade, the fourth on the inside of her right forearm below the first. Each one vanished from the page within 24 hours, as the first had. Each one appeared on her skin with the same quality of having always been there, visible only once the light was right and she was looking. She was a bookbinder. She had a professional and personal relationship with the permanence of text that most people did not, and she found, in the first 2 weeks, the Memoria Aeterna's behavior more remarkable than distressing. She was producing documents, personal documents, records of her own thinking, letters she had been failing to write for years, that were being preserved in a medium more durable than paper. The skin is warmer and more present than the page. She could read the first letter on her forearm every morning. She liked that. The gaps began in the 3rd week. Small at first, the kind of small gaps that most people have most days and attribute to distraction or age. A colleague's name that took longer to arrive than it should have. The title of a book she had recently read and recommended. The specific address of a supplier she had been using for 8 years. She noticed them. She kept a log. The ink on the pages she wrote with the Memoria Aeterna was not simply migrating to her skin. It was taking something with it. The Memoria Aeterna, the eternal memory, was not a product name in the conventional sense. It was a description of what the ink did with the memories it encountered. Preserved them, permanently, in the most durable medium available. The paper was temporary, the skin was better. The mind was the source, and the source was being depleted. The ink had been distilled from the tears of a scribe named Albrecht Maas, condemned for forgery in 1643 in a city that no longer existed under its 1643 name, who had spent his final weeks in a cell weeping over the loss of his life's work. 20 years of manuscript production, a library of the mind's output, that he had known would be destroyed after his execution. He had wept and wept, and someone with a particular knowledge of the alchemy of grief had been present with a glass vessel, and what had been collected was not merely salt water. The tears of a person weeping over the loss of their memory's product are a specific substance. They carry the memory content itself, not the neurological pattern, but the essential residue of what was being mourned. Mas had wept his library into the vessel. The ink was Mas's memories, liquefied. When someone wrote with it, the ink did what it had always been designed to do. It preserved the content by drawing it from the source and fixing it in the most permanent medium available. On skin, text is permanent. In memory, nothing is. By the 5th week, Miriam could not remember the name of the street she had grown up on. She could remember the street, the specific quality of light in summer, the specific sound of the neighbor's dog, the texture of the low garden wall she had used to sit on. But the name was gone. Not inaccessible, gone. The slot was empty. She wrote about it. She wrote a full page in the Memoria Aeterna about the street, about the light and the dog and the wall, and the next morning, the page was blank, and the writing was on her back, across her shoulder blades, and the street's light and the dog's sound were still in her memory, but the slot where the street's name had been was still empty. She researched the bottle. She found the estate sale's provenance trail. She found Albrecht Maas in the records of a Bavarian ecclesiastical court, 1643, forgery conviction, death sentence. She found a reference in the margin of a secondary source to a substance described as the condensate of a condemned man's intellectual grief, of use in the production of texts requiring absolute permanence. She translated this with a professional's Latin competence and sat with the translation for a long time. She put the bottle in a lead-lined archival box she kept for potentially hazardous restoration materials and stopped writing with it. By the 6th week, the gaps had extended to her professional knowledge. The name of a specific adhesive formulation she had used for 15 years, gone. The standard weight of archival linen thread, gone. Not gone in the way of forgetting, in the way of information that has sunk below the accessible surface. Gone in the way of text from the Memoria Aeterna's pages, cleanly removed, the slot empty, no residue. She looked at her skin. She could read herself like a book. Every letter she had written, every page of diary she had composed in those first weeks before she understood what was happening, preserved in the permanent medium of her own body in perfect, matte black ink. She opened the lead-lined box. The bottle was almost empty. She had not been writing with it. She had not opened the box in 3 weeks. The bottle was almost empty. The ink, she understood with the specific clarity of a conservator who has spent 23 years understanding what happens to organic materials over time, did not require the pen. It did not require the page. Once introduced to a system, once the first letter had migrated from the paper to her skin, the ink had a pathway. The writing on her skin was the page now. The memories the ink required for its eternal preservation were drawn, not through the pen and the paper, but through the skin itself, directly, while she slept. She found the last blank book on her workbench the following morning. She had not placed it there. It was one of her own bindings. The specific quality of her own craftsmanship, her signature materials, her precise style unmistakable. The cover was blank, The pages were blank. On the spine, in the Memoria Aeterna's specific matte black, a single word, Vogel. She opened it. The first page was dated the morning of the estate sale in Bath. Her handwriting, her specific, professional, calligraphic bookbinder's hand, the hand she had spent 23 years developing, filled the page. She read the first entry and recognized it, as she recognized everything written in the Memoria Aeterna with complete accuracy. These were her memories, the ones that had been leaving, the street name, the adhesive formulation, the colleague whose name had taken too long to arrive. They were all in the book. She turned to the final written page. It ended mid-sentence. The last entry dated this morning, the sentence incomplete. She looked at the bottle. Empty. The stopper was in. The glass was clean. She looked at her hands. She could no longer remember her mother's face, could remember that she had a mother, could remember the quality of her presence, the feeling of her, but the specific visual image was gone. Miriam Vogel's face was not in the book. She had not written about her mother's face. She had not written about her own identity, the deep, foundational layer of self that does not get put into letters, because it does not need to be written down, because it simply is. The last blank pages of the book, she picked up the pen. She found, in the empty workshop, the specific quality of a woman who is conserving what is left and knows the tools of the trade. And she began, carefully, to write down everything that remained. The label said, "Do not write what you cannot carry." She bought the bottle because the second notation was interesting. She kept the note in mind. She wrote personal letters she had been failing to write for months. And the ink was extraordinary, and the documents migrated to her skin. And she found this remarkable rather than alarming. She noticed the gaps in week 3 and opened a log. She researched the provenance in week 5 and put the bottle in the lead-lined box. She stopped writing with it. She did everything right. She was thorough and precise, and she found the source, and she secured the material, and she stopped. The ink continued without her. This is the specific horror I keep returning to. The pathway was already established. The skin was already the page. The memories were already migrating through the mechanism she had completed by writing the first letter. Securing the bottle was the right response, and it changed nothing, because the response came after the mechanism was running. Her identity is in the book now. The last pages are blank, and she is filling them with what remains, working backward from what she can still access, writing toward the foundations. The book is beautifully made. She made it herself, years ago without knowing why. Her name is on the spine. I think about the scribe who wept his library into a vessel. I think about the 20 years of work he was mourning. I think about the fact that his grief became the thing that takes the grief of others, that the instrument of loss is made from loss. Miriam Vogel is at her workbench writing. The book is very nearly full. Thank you for joining me tonight. My name is Ilara, and I am your whisperer. I'll be here, waiting for you next time. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below. I want to hear your stories. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more. This has been Karma Quietly Whispers. See you soon.